So I got Johnny Mack in the green room right now. Let's go to him. We'll talk to him about that trade a little bit, talk to him about the final thoughts on that preseason game, and then what's to come here this week on Football 24/7. So let me bring up Johnny Mack right now here. John, do I got you with me, brother?
Yeah, the Bluetooth didn't connect, so hopefully I sound okay. But
Sound good, Johnny Mack. I see your videos on, but I'm sure you want to be covered up, right? I'm not sure if you're ready. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm going to be driving. So
yeah. Good to see you. I can see J Mack in the groove room. Good to see my boy McMullen this morning. Johnny Mack, a couple things, man. They had the preseason game, obviously, Saturday, and a big trade. Not a big trade, but an interesting trade nonetheless yesterday for the Philadelphia Eagles, picking up John Metchie. What's on the agenda this week early, John? Who was set to speak this morning? And then we'll kind of dive into some of those progressions from the weekend.
Vic Fangio Day, which is typically obviously a big day. Today would be more interesting for at least Kevin Patullo because of the trade for John Metchie. But you never give up an opportunity to talk to Vic, especially with Makuba playing so well in the game, Campbell playing so well, Jacorian Bennett, starting to maybe grasp some things. So I think those were the three big stories, the three positive stories from the defense. And we'll get to talk about that with Vic. But yeah, the more I think overnight about this trade, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. This is a tough one to explain because things had been going pretty well with the Eagles' backup receivers to the point where I think they were going to have to cut people that, potentially could play in this league, and that's rare. The Eagles have had trouble finding depth, and it seemed like they had depth at the wide receiver position. And then you think about, it's almost a year to the day you acquired Jahan Dotson in training camp from Washington. It was like a little bit later, August 22nd, somewhere around there. And you spent 3/4 of the season trying to develop a chemistry with Jalen Hurts. And on top of it, I don't see the fit. It's just, now when I scale it back and say, all right, well, Harrison Bryant's not going to make this team. And this is the mentality of how he liked the guy in the draft process. All right, hasn't worked out in his first stop. Let's see if we can start the reclamation project. From that standpoint, if that's all it is, that's fine. And you're taking a shot. And, there's 3 training camp practices left. I think because of his name and because of what he was in college, there's people that I don't see this as a contributing player. And I think there's a good opportunity he's going to be cut at the cut down. And you try to get him back on the practice squad. So the more I think about it, I'm like, this one doesn't make a lot of sense. Now the other aspect is, well, if you're going to move Dotson for like an edge rusher or something of more of a value, maybe
right, because he probably has a little bit more market on the open value in the open market.
Yeah, definitely would. And I was thinking about, Rondell Moore tore his ACL again, and so, I don't know what his first injury was, but he's out for the season. So Minnesota needs a punt returner and a receiver, and I have a young edge rusher that really splashed in the preseason, had like 3 sacks or something. So maybe that's a potential, but just coming into this wide receiver room without a secondary move, I don't see where this makes a ton of sense.
Maybe, John, you brought up yesterday that the A.J. Brown stuff. I'm not sure if you were able to prod around and talk to anybody, but is there more concern for A.J. Brown? Because like you say, on the surface, that doesn't make sense. But if you envision a team where A.J. Brown's not out there week in and week out, okay, maybe it makes a little bit more sense. Now you got Smitty, you got Metchie, and you got Dotson to at least be your 3 wide receivers, and you can keep an eye on Smith, Johnny Wilson, in the roles that they're in right now. Is there something more to be worried about with A.J. Brown here, John?
Yeah, I mentioned that when we talked yesterday, a little bit, because they were ramping him up to get him back for the joint practices, and there was evidently some kind of setback because he sat down again. So a little bit. And again, it would only be short term for early in the season, not long term worry. But even in that instance, can he get up to speed in 3 training camp practices and a couple practices? Um, yeah, I don't know. I still think you would go with Johnny Wilson more likely early in the season if you had to. Um, so there's some consternation about week 1 for AJ Brown, and maybe I get down there today and he's healthy and he's out there, which I doubt because I don't expect to see him for the rest of the camp and certainly preseason. Obviously, he's not going to play, so that's going to be more of a story for the 2 weeks leading up to the Dallas game, but a little bit. But I don't see this as the help. So. Yeah, this to me, the more I think about it, just strikes up. All right, they liked him coming out. Bryant wasn't going to make the team, so get a quick look at him and go from there.
Yeah, it doesn't really fully make sense to me either, John. If you speculate a move coming forward or moving forward that maybe comes on the back of this, this is my concern with it. You bring in another guy on a 1-year deal who comes in at the same time, as you pointed out, as Jahan Dotson. You had to spend an entire year to get him acclimated with Jalen Hurts. Now he's spent the summer in Texas working with Jalen. He's gone through the all training camp. I don't think they're going to trade Jahan Dotson, John. Now, I'm wondering if maybe they will because of this Metchie move. I'm wondering if there's more to come, but you're basically replacing him with a guy that has no chemistry with Jalen Hurts again.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a perfect solution, but if you do want to trade for something more, more urgent for this particular team at this particular moment, you have to give up something. And he would be a logical piece to potentially, get something back at least. And he's only got 1 year left on this deal. We've talked about that. He's probably not going to be here next year anyway. So, yeah, you take a step back at that wide receiver 3 position, but the Eagles don't use it that much anyway. So that's just, my speculation is you have to give up something. And I think Dotson, it has some value to where you can get, maybe a young pass rusher's got an upside that's locked in another city. That's why I bring that up because,
Right.
They have good edge rushers. So, it's Gabe Murphy. He was a great college player. But he's not going to play there. So, maybe there's a second shoe to drop.
Yeah, I think there's going to have to be, John, because I'm wondering. I'm looking here, and I'm like, boy, there's one part of the team that didn't really need help. It's offense, and 2, more specifically, wide receiver room. Man, this was. I mean, John, you called it earlier in the offseason. This is the most talented receiver room they've had in the Nick Sirianni era. Most depth, and here we are trading for John Metchie. Now, the other thing I will say, John, and you pointed this out. The name does get people kind of going a little bit because he was a very good college player and somebody that had expectations, a second-round draft pick. But they basically traded like nothing for this guy. They were gonna cut Harrison Bryant. They swapped backs the pick they sent in the Gardner Johnson trade. So basically, John, it has turned into the Eagles sent the Texans C.J. Gardner Johnson and Harrison Bryant, and they got back John Metchie and Kenyon Green. It looks like the Texans won that trade on the surface, but not much they had to send to get John Metchie here.
No, well, I mean, obviously, if CJ is healthy, he's by far the best player in that trade. So just from the standpoint of getting a good player, but we all know that was addition by subtraction. There were other issues in play when it came to CJ. So, but yeah, I mean, Kenyon Green is injured still. We'll see if he can get back out there today. He's not, opportunity there with Landon Dickerson potentially missing week 1. And we're talking about Brett Toth, and now we're talking about Drew Kendall because he played there in the game. And we're not talking about Kenyon Green because he's not out there. So, it's can't make the club in the tub, as they say. And that's what's going on with Kenyon Green. So, but, that's a guy the Eagles liked in the draft. And
Right. They're
taking a shot, and it didn't work out in Houston. Same thing. John Metchie, they liked in the draft, didn't work out in Houston. Take a shot. The timing here's the problematic part for Metchie. And you went through it last year with Dotson, who's, certainly more gifted from a, speed standpoint and things like that. And it took him that long to acclimate. Now Metchie's a better route runner, but you see, obviously overcame a lot to get back on the field. So I don't want to criticize the guy, but there wasn't a lot of production. And the Texans, yes, they have a deep receiver room on paper, but 2 of those guys are rookies. So there's a huge projection there, and they didn't want to move on with them. So that tells you a lot as well.
John, without projecting the next move, I want to analyze exactly where the team is today. Where does Metchie fit in that room? Is he wide receiver 4? Does he battle for wide receiver 3? Is he wide receiver 6? I mean, where do you have him in this room right now on August 18th?
Well, I definitely think he's, as long as Dotson is here, he's fighting for basically wide receiver 5 behind Johnny Wilson. So, yeah, I and again, when you're that far down the depth chart, you have to play some kind of role on special teams. And because he was a star in Alabama, he's not used to doing that. So, yeah, I mean, don't be surprised in the initial cut down to 53 if there's not another move that, he's cut. And, the Eagles will try to bring him back, I would imagine, but I wouldn't be surprised by that at all if that's the end game here.
John, when's the initial 53 cut?
A week from tomorrow.
A week from tomorrow. All right, so 8 days from now, next Tuesday. Johnny Mac, good stuff there. John, we'll talk more about him. We'll have a full show later on this evening for Birds 365. John, moving into Vic Fangio Day, what do you want to ask Vic after that preseason game, John? I thought obviously the key positive of the game was Andrew McCuba and the turnovers, but I didn't see too much else in that ugly preseason game. What's on your mind as you head into a press conference with Vic Fangio this morning?
Yeah, I think McCuba, Campbell, Bennett are the 3 stories. McCuba played very well. I have a feeling Vic's going to downplay some of the turnovers because he's a kind of a, grub guy, obviously. And, he was Johnny on the spot with the fumble recovery, and that was a really bad decision by Dylan Gabriel. But nonetheless, the guy's out there making plays, and you know how that works in the NFL. Eli Ricks has gotten 3 years out of it and counting for making a play in the preseason. So I think it's going to resonate. It certainly resonated with fans and even other media members. And then I think Campbell played very well, the blitz early, but he was also active. And now you have a good problem because Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Is having a good summer as well. So all of a sudden you're flush at linebacker because Zach Bond's going to be back. And I also think Bennett. I think Bennett's more of, Jackson Adorie's been pedestrian and Ringo's not been good, and he came out and he had a nice PBU, and he showed some signs, and maybe it's just in comparison it looked good. But hey, if he's the best you got, he's the best you got. And that might be the first step to Jacorian Bennett getting in the starting lineup.
Yeah, that position, John, is not looking too good for me right now. John, how much do you think Andrew Makuba improved his chances at being the week 1 starter at safety? Because I did think Sidney Brown kind of had the lead, especially with Makuba missing all that time. But you come back and you start making plays, John. I think you're going to make Vic think.
Well, yeah, I think that's where the Eagles want to go anyway. So obviously, it gives you almost a crutch to lean on to go in that direction if you want. But we saw last year. I still think, the missed time hurt Makuba, and Vic might slow it down. But I think ultimately, whether it's week 1, week 4, week 8, I think Makuba is going to be out there. And certainly playing that well in the game only helped that accelerate that, I would say.
They don't have enough depth at safety to think about a potential trade. If they feel like Makuba could be the guy, they wouldn't look to move on from a Sidney Brown or maybe even a Keely Ringo if he doesn't, if he can't get on the football field. Do you think any of those guys on defense that could lose out their spot would be trade potential candidates, John, or what?
Yeah, I mean, they're both good special teams players, but I would think more Ringo than Sidney. But that's just a thought of they're a little bit deeper at corner. They seem to like Tristan McMullen though, and I thought he played pretty poorly, taking a couple bad angles in the game.
Yeah, he did.
Andre Sam is somebody they like as well, but you really want to go into an NFL season with that as your depth at safety. Now, Cooper plays into that as well because you could just move Cooper back there. But, Cooper also plays into it as corner. I just think they're a little bit deeper at corner, so if one of them was going to go, I'd say Ringo.
Yeah, we'll see what ends up happening there with the trade moves. John, anything else that you took away from the preseason game? Now, a couple days removed for the back of the roster. We're 8 days away from the cuts, and obviously you don't see anything really positive there. But you try and look and see if any of those back end players, if any of the anybody makes the decisions tough for Howie Roseman. I don't think that many did it, unfortunately, this week, John. But anything you saw that maybe I missed?
Certainly not offensively.
No. I joke, John. That's why they traded for Metchie. Howie said, I will never field an offense that looks like that again.
Well, I don't think that was about the receivers as much as the offensive line and the quarterback.
No, maybe neither.
You're like I always say, as a receiver, you're at the mercy of the quarterback getting you the football. And the quarterbacks weren't comfortable with, but that's the NFL. I say it all the time. 13 reps tend to be ugly, no matter where you are. The best team in the league, worst team in the league. And it's really difficult for those 13 quarterbacks because they're playing with generally offensive lines that are sieves, and you kind of saw that in that particular game. And then it's sort of because third string quarterbacks are also third string quarterbacks, so it also becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because they're not equipped to handle being under siege as maybe some of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. So the whole thing just turns into ugliness, and
it's like complimentary football in a negative way.
Yeah. So you saw the best case scenarios. You got Brett Tothan at center, and it's probably a snap that Dorian Thompson-Robinson should handle. It was high, and he was discombobulated, and he pulled it down, and all of a sudden Julian Okwara is bearing down on him. He gets smacked and throws the football, and it's a duck in the middle of the field, and it turns into a pick six. It's just a perfect storm of mud because of the players out there. And that's why, you'll see it the other way, like KJ Henry, our old buddy here, good dude, but, he's got a big pick six and preseason game. What does it really mean in that type of situation? That's the problem you have when you're evaluating preseason football. And I think a lot of people say, oh, he made a play, that's good for him. And it's not necessarily, it's never bad, but it's not necessarily going to hold that much weight.
Johnny Mac, good stuff. It's impossible to speculate, John, the next move that Howie could make. I don't think anybody anticipated yesterday that the trade news would be for a wide receiver. But if I put on the John McMullen general manager cap, all right, who would you trade for right now? A lot of people want a corner. A lot of people think that would make the biggest difference on the football team. A lot of people want an edge rusher. Some people want a safety. What do you think, John?
Well, they already got a corner. Like, I don't know what people are expecting. You're not getting a Pro Bowl corner in late August. You're trying to get a player with upside. They already made that move at corner, which is Corey and Bennett. So I've started there. I'll end there. I can't believe how he's going to go into a season with the edge rushers he has, and I still think he's going to try to do something there.
We'll see what they end up doing, Johnny Mac. John, final word is that John Metchie and Devontae Smith are very close, and maybe that gives him a leg up in making this football team this year. Devontae Smith had a comment earlier. One of the most important jersey swaps he ever had in his career was with John Metchie. So obviously a player he likes. Might not mean anything, but I do think it's interesting that how he's kind of building. He gets all the Georgia guys on defense. Now he's getting some of those Bama guys together on offense. Interesting the way how he's been building this team the last couple of years. And I thought adding another Alabama player, even for a low cost at an interesting time, was a move to note by Howie Roseman.
Yeah, from the standpoint of, again, that Bryant was not going to be part of this team. I have no problem with it. But obviously, what he went through, and he and DeMonte are close, so obviously it's meaningful for him. I even say it about Vic. People could overrate that stuff. He's not here because he's DeMonte's friend. He's here because the Eagles liked him coming out of the draft. And again, maybe they can start the reclamation project, get an early look at him, and learn something about him over these final 3 camp practices. And we'll see if they do anything in between the Jets game and the cut down. So he's either going to have 3 or 4 practices to quickly show he can be part of this team, which is going to be difficult. But yeah, even, how he makes the decisions when it comes to personnel.
Yep, no doubt. Johnny Mac, great stuff this morning, brother. Appreciate you doing it. Get there safely to NovaCare Complex. Practice number 16 today in training camp. Only 3 remain with you guys having full access. We'll talk to you after. All right, brother?
All right, thank you.
All right, there's Johnny Mac. John McMullen joining us right here on a morning edition of Football 24/7. Day number 16 of training camp coming up. Eagles make a big trade yesterday. Bring in John Metchie III from the Houston Texans.